From the studios of Channel 12, I Believe in Miracles, with a message of hope and music of inspiration, with your host, Pastor John Michael.
And my wife Marilyn joins me in presenting this program today. You know, there is so much to be happy about, and I want to focus on one of the greatest messages of happiness that the world has ever heard. So we're going to look at that today. Back in 1999, Marilyn and I had the good fortune of being able to go to Israel and spend 2 months. 2 of those weeks were in Jerusalem. One Sunday we went to church at 3 different churches, all on Sunday morning, all in East Jerusalem. The first one was the Garden Church. And this particular picture is something I took at the Gordon's Garden tomb. It is exciting because one of the authors of a song was C. Austin Miles. He was a pharmacist, and he also was interested in music, and he had a hobby of photography. And when he was in the darkroom, he would often, while waiting for the film to develop in the dim blue light that was there, he would meditate upon the scripture and pray and do some introspection. And one day he was thinking about John chapter 20, which is the song of, which is the story of the resurrection of Christ and Mary coming to the tomb and discovering that Jesus was alive. This is the setting for the song we begin the program with. I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses, and He walks with me, and He talks with me, and He tells me that I am His own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the sound of His voice is so sweet, the birds hush their singing, and the melody that He gave to me within my heart is ringing, and He walks with me, and He talks with me, and He tells me that I am His own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever That song was written by C. Austin Miles and is certainly one that is loved and known by many, many people. You know, there's a lot of people that don't pay any attention to what I have to say, and that's okay. But I'm glad for those that do get something out of what I do have to say. I guess that's the joy of every pastor, to know that when someone is listening, and when they're being encouraged or inspired or comforted or instructed by the things that come from God's book, the Holy Bible. Well, it's good to be with you, and I want you to know and spread this word to your friends that it's possible to see our program anytime, anywhere in the world, just by going to YouTube. You can go directly to YouTube, and the address is youtube.com, and then it's /GBC Mankato. We'll leave that up there for a bit so you can write it down. Now, there's another option that you have. You can go to KEYC TV, and under the home at the top of the page, there's I Believe in Miracles. Just click on I Believe in Miracles, and you'll have a chance at that page to go directly to YouTube. Or you can go to Grace Baptist Church, which is Grace Baptist Church Mankato, and you can click on Ministries, and at the bottom you'll see I Believe in Miracles, and that'll take you there too. So we've got a lot of different options. This is the day of options. And we have also to share with you some inspiring music by Marilyn with the organ. And I'm going to have her play a couple of songs, and then I'm going to join her. And this is because of the resurrection, because of the message of the resurrection, because the garden tomb is empty. And Jesus arose from the dead and revealed himself to Mary and to his disciples and to many others. There is this comforting message. So here's Marilyn. Life's work is ended, and I cross the swelling tide. On that bright and glorious morning I shall see. I shall know my Redeemer when I reach the other side, and his smile will be the first to welcome me. I shall know him, I shall know him, and redeemed by his side I shall stand. I shall know him. special when she says, I shall see him. For the first time, she said, I will see him. Well, it's time to get into the message, and I want to speak to you today on 3 gardens that are found in the Bible. Now, everybody loves a garden. Everybody loves a garden setting, and loves the greenery and the beauty and the tranquility of a garden, the fruitfulness of a garden. This is the lushness of a garden. It is always a pleasant thing to go to a grove and see the flowers and see whatever else there is in the garden. Well, now there are three gardens in the Bible. One in the Old Testament and 2 from the New Testament. In fact, they're both from the Gospel of John. So we're going to be in Genesis and John. And we'll start with the Garden of Eden, which is Genesis chapter 2 and 3. The first book of the Bible. The word Genesis means beginning. This is the start. And it begins with the creation and then the Garden of Eden. Now, the Garden of Eden was something special. It was a place of tranquility. It was a place of beauty. It was a place of perfection. It was the utopia. Sometimes I like to do the crossword puzzles. I love the crossword puzzles in the Mankato Free Press, and I do those crossword puzzles. And sometimes the perfect place. Well, it might be Eden or it might be utopia, but anyway, the perfect place. This is Eden, and it is a place not only of perfection, but it's also a place of innocence, because we find Adam, and then that wonderful first marriage takes place in Genesis chapter 2. Right at the end of the chapter, it is the model for every wedding that takes place. It is any Christian wedding, and probably far beyond Christian weddings. It is the model. For this cause shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and the 2 of them shall become one flesh. It is God's plan. When Jesus was inquired by some about divorce, he said, from the beginning it was not so, but because of the hardness of the people's hearts. Well, people's hearts must be getting harder and harder and harder as time goes on, because there's more divorce. Now even the homosexuals are getting divorced. So that's the way life is. Strange world we live in, but a wonderful world when you see it from God's point of view, and when you see it in the light of Eden, this innocence. One man for one woman for one lifetime. That's the Garden of Eden. But then when you get to chapter number 2, you learn something more about the Garden of Eden, and that it is a garden of temptation. There's an old hymn that's sometimes I like to use on the telecast. It's the song entitled, Yield Not to Temptation, for Yielding is Sin. And the whole song is built upon this, yield not to temptation. It's kind of addressed to the young Christian, or to the youth, to beware. There are so many temptations that surround us, and you want to have victory over temptation. Well, here came temptation. Satan, who is subtle, who is cunning, who was the liar and is called by Jesus in John 8:44, the father of lies, he came and approached Eve and enticed her to take of the forbidden tree. I mean, they were free to take from every tree and any tree but one. The tree of the knowledge of good and of evil, which was in the center of the garden. But both Adam and Eve did yield to the temptation. They were baited to do evil, and they couldn't resist. You know, I don't know what your besetting struggle is. I had a man call me from out of state today, in tears, a grown man, 50 or more years old, in tears, because his life there's pain in his life, and it's not a physical pain, it is an internal heart pain. He even described himself as lost. and he cares about me, and he trusts me, and I'm honored to have him call me, and I try to give him some perspective on his place in life. One of the things I gave to him is that word disappointment. I said, write it down. He wrote it down. Then I said, cross off the D. And he crossed off the D. And now I said, put an H above it. And I said, now read it back to me. And this is what he said, his appointment. Yeah, it gives you a new view of the struggle. Sometimes you fall and you're not only on your knees, you're on your face. You failed. It's hard to say I'm sorry. It's hard to say I'm guilty. And yet there's something freeing about that. There's something that's wonderful about being able to triumph after you have failed. But here is the Garden of Eden, meant to be a place of perfection, but it became a place of temptation, and it became a place of pain. They were put out of the garden. So you might say, in a sense, Eden is still a perfect place, but it's just that imperfect people can't be in Eden yet. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8, this is the instruction of Peter. He said, be sober, be vigilant. Be vigilant. Look this way, look that way. Keep your eyes open. It says, be vigilant, for knowing that your adversary, the devil, goeth about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He wants to get you, no doubt about it. He wants to get your kids. He wants to get your neighbors. He wants to get, life is a struggle. The Garden of Eden, I want you to think of it today as a place of temptation, and be warned and prepared. The second garden. This is from John chapter 18. I'm reading verse 1 and 2. John's Gospel, the fourth book of the New Testament. It says, when Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook of Kidron, which is just to the east side of Jerusalem, and his disciples, or he went where there was a garden, into which he entered, and his disciples. And Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place, for Jesus oftentimes resorted there with his disciples. Here's a garden that Jesus frequented often with his disciples. That's John 18, verse 1 and 2. So, my friend, I want you to think about this. This is also called the Garden of Gethsemane. Have you been to Israel? Have you been to Jerusalem? Without a doubt, if you went on a tour, you would have gone to the Garden of Gethsemane, and the place that is identified as a stone where Jesus prayed. The prayer of agony. It's a pain place. It's a place of struggle, a place of wrestling. The word Gethsemane means olive press, and if you've seen an olive press, for this Mount of Olives is that mountain on the east side of the city of Jerusalem, and that's where the olive groves were, and the olive trees, and the harvesting of the olives. And then the olives were put into the olive press, where this great stone would roll over them to squeeze the juice out of the olives to make the olive oil. And this is the place where Jesus prayed. Now, his prayer is found in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And if you'll remember, when talking about that, there's, in the book of Hebrews, I'll refer to this one first. Hebrews and chapter number 5. And I want to read this to you because it is very descriptive of the experience of Jesus in that garden place. Chapter 5. In the days of his flesh. This is verse number 7 and 8. Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things that he suffered. It is in the Garden of Gethsemane that Jesus obeyed. It was the place of struggle. And if you'll go to the Gospel of I've got it written down here, the Gospel of Luke in chapter number 22, because that's where Jesus is praying. And he says, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. He had gone a short ways away from the three disciples, John, Peter, James, and John. And he was agonizing there. He said, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. He didn't say that just once, he said it twice. In fact, it says he said it 3 times. It's as though Jesus had to go beyond the ifs and get to the place of full and total resignation. He was struggling not for himself, but for us, for the human family, for the fallen race. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. So by Adam, we have all fallen in the category of sinners. It was John Newton who called himself a wretch like me, feeling the burden and the weight of sin in his life. And then, in that place, he comes to this point of total resignation. Not my will, but thine be done. And there's something wonderful about that prayer. This is the prayer, this is the Garden of Agony. This is the Garden of Agony. But we must hasten on to get to the Garden number 3, chapter 19 of the Gospel of John, the very next chapter, chapter 19. And this is where we read about the place. And now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden. This is the verse number 41. And in the garden a new sepulchre, wherein was never man yet laid. There they laid Jesus. It is the place of burial, yes, the garden of burial, but it's more than that. It is the place of resurrection, because the grave is empty. You say on the first day of the week, the disciples came, but the stone was rolled away, and he was not there. The angel said, he is not here. He is risen. And Mary came. That's the one that C. Austin Miles was meditating upon, John chapter 20, about the resurrection chapter. And when she found out it was Jesus, she thought it was the gardener, but it was Jesus. She was absolutely ecstatic and ran and told the others. So this is the garden of victory. It is a garden of resurrection. It is the place of anastasis, which is the Greek word which means to stand up again. I have some resurrection quotes. First one from Charles Colson, the late Charles Colson. He said, I know the resurrection is a fact, and Watergate proved it to me. How? Because 12 men testified they had seen Jesus raised from the dead. Then they proclaimed that truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Everyone was beaten, tortured, stoned, and put in prison. They would not have endured that if it weren't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they couldn't keep a lie for 3 weeks. You're telling me 12 apostles could keep a lie for 40 years? Absolutely impossible. End of quote. Here's another one. Robert Moyer was a teacher at the Northwestern Bible College, now Northwestern University in Roseville, Minnesota. And he wrote this: the resurrection of the dead is the chief truth of the Christian faith. He who takes away the resurrection mantles our future with the Egyptian darkness. To take away the resurrection is to leave man with no preeminence over the beast. Other doctrines are important. This is one of the essentials. End of quote. One more. Lee Strobel, who's written books, a contemporary writer who's written books on evidences and defense of the faith. He says, I went to a psychiatrist friend and said, if 500 people claimed to see Jesus after he died, it was just an hallucination. He said, hallucinations are an individual event. If 500 people have the same hallucination, that's a bigger miracle than the resurrection. The end of quote by Lee Strobel. Well, friend, I believe in the resurrection of the dead, and this is the place of victory, the garden of victory. I hope you spend time there and rejoice. Lord in heaven, hear the sinner's prayer, and may you bring life and victory and success and hope to many hearts, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. The three gardens are the Garden of Eden, and then there's the Garden of Gethsemane and the Garden of Calvary, where the resurrection took place. Well, that's enough to get a guy inspired to go to church, isn't it? And to hear more and learn more about Jesus Christ and what He has done for us. This earth is a short time, 70 years, 80 years, 90 years. It's a short span of time compared to eternity. Get ready for the future. Well, thanks for watching us today, and we hope you'll tell others about the program. It's on the internet, and until next week, goodbye, and God bless you.
You've been listening to program number 2278. If you have any comments or inquiries regarding this telecast, please address them to Miracles, P.O. Box 128, Mankato, Minnesota, 56002, and refer to program number 2278. I Believe in Miracles is a ministry of Grace Baptist Church in Mankato.